This video and all of its contents, including any opinions expressed by the narrator, are strictly for entertainment purposes only and is not intended in any way as a substitute for professional services and consultation from a licensed therapist, doctor, attorney, or other licensed professional service provider. Each person must make their own life decisions, and those decisions are theirs. Welcome back to Find Your Alpha, one of your favorite channels on YouTube. I'm back at you this week with another great video story, and you can see the title right on your screen. Newlywed wife hooked up with her ex, so I left town and never went back. Now, let's get into this story and see what it's all about. What I'm about to discuss happened to me exactly 6 years ago this month. He says it was May. Whenever the day comes up on the calendar, I dread it. Every year around this time, I start getting flashbacks, and it's a real downer for me. On the morning of D-Day, my life was at an all-time high, but by midnight, I had sunk to my lowest point. I was a defeated man who felt as if his life was over. I'll now explain how everything began between me and my ex. I was a junior in college when I met the woman who 15 months later I would make my wife. Are you kidding me? You're still in college and you meet this woman and then 15 months later you're marrying her? What could go wrong? For this, I'll call her Vicky and call myself Anthony. Like me, Vicky was a junior and we met while studying at the campus library. We immediately hit it off, and I knew right away something big was in store for us. We kissed on our second date, but things didn't progress to third base until we had been dating for 3 weeks, and we didn't go all the way until 5 weeks after that. So this guy waited almost 2 months to get the good stuff, which, as you know, is very unusual in today's modern society. Prior to getting together, we each had just one previous partner. Are you sure about that? I had a brief but passionate relationship with a woman when I was 18, while Vicky had a serious relationship with a guy that lasted over 5 years. Now, I put up a yellow sign here just to say caution. This woman is only, 21, maybe she's 22 years old, and she's been in a relationship prior to meeting you with a guy for 5 years. Oh, that's a dangerous situation there because that guy, I'm sure, imprinted on her. He says, keep this in mind for later. In my previous relationship, we both were each other's first, and we dated about 6 months before drifting apart. She was a partier who liked to drink and smoke grass, and I just wasn't into that lifestyle. As for Vicky, her relationship was quite serious, and she and her then boyfriend were on their way to getting married before she discovered he had been cheating on her when she was at college. Not only that, the girl he was cheating on her with got pregnant, and he broke up with Vicky and married his pregnant AP. I was the first guy she dated after that relationship ended. I guess you could say I was her rebound lover. Whatever the situation that brought us together, we fell deeply in love, and I quickly envisioned our future together and wanted to take the next step. So after dating for just 7 months, I asked Vicky to marry me, and she said yes. Of course, that's a big mistake. My parents lost their mind when I told them. My dad specifically told me we were too young and didn't even have jobs yet. Yes, Dad, you nailed it. I promised my parents we would not get married until after we both graduated and found work. This calmed them down a bit, but they still tried to dissuade me right up to our wedding day. After that, they just went along with it and accepted that this thing was going to happen against their wishes. I kept my promise to my parents, and we didn't set the wedding date until we both had jobs. As for Vicky's parents, they were all for us getting married. They saw me as a great guy and totally different than the guy Vicky dated before. So this guy she dated before, what I'm reading into this, was likely a bad boy. When it came time for planning the wedding, they paid for everything, including our honeymoon in the Bahamas. When it came to my job choice, Dad wasn't happy with me here either. Instead of taking a job paying more money in the metro area where I grew up, I accepted a job 230 miles away in a rural community near Vicky's hometown. So this guy is following this woman, and this is something you don't want to do as a man. The job didn't pay as well, but Vicky had already secured a job in her field in her hometown, so I thought this was a good compromise. My dad explained to me when it comes to his vocation, a man shouldn't compromise. He said it was never good for a man to follow a woman. It should be the other way around. He said if a woman truly loves a man, she will follow him to the end of the earth. His dad sounds like a strong man with traditional values. I told Dad things are different today than when he and Mom grew up, explaining women are viewed as equals when it comes to careers and working. Again, here my parents were disappointed but accepted that I was now an adult making my own decisions. The wedding day came and it was great. We were married in the church Vicky's family attended and had a big reception afterwards. There were over 180 people there, of which about 40 consisted of my family and friends, and the rest were Vicky's people. After we got back from our honeymoon, we settled into our jobs and things were going well. We moved into a newly built 2-bedroom apartment in Vicky's hometown and spent the next few weeks furnishing and decorating it like we wanted. Vicky's job was less than a half mile from our apartment, and some days she would walk to work, while mine was 16 miles away. The drive was a straight shot and only took about 25 minutes, 30 tops, so I didn't mind it. In fact, I liked the drive as it gave me time to unwind before getting home. Since I didn't have friends there, my whole world centered around Vicky, my job, and her family and friends. Now, that is a big mistake, as we've talked about in other videos, because as you can see, this guy is building his whole world around this woman, and you don't want to do that. That didn't bother me though, as I was busy working 60 hours a week and I really like Vicky's family and her friends. They're all good people, and I don't have one negative thing to say about any of them even today. Every month, Vicky and her closest friends would meet for dinner and talk. On these nights, she'd get home by 7:30 or 8 at the latest. He says, hold this thought for later, too. These were her girls' nights, but not the typical kind we guys think about. Instead, these ladies actually met to eat and talk, nothing else. At about the 9-month mark of our marriage, things were going well and we decided it was time to start a family. Vicky went off birth control and we amped up things in the bedroom, using techniques we read about to help increase the chances of conceiving. A couple months went by and no baby yet, but we were sure having fun trying. I imagine you're probably reading what I've written so far thinking, this guy's life sounds pretty good. Well, it was right up to D-Day. I'll now skip forward to that day. It was a Wednesday and Vicky and 3 of her girlfriends planned to meet up at a local restaurant for their monthly get-together. They met after work, and I stopped by the restaurant on my way home to talk with them a bit and to pick up the takeout order Vicky placed for me. It was an Italian place that made my favorite lasagna and homemade Italian bread. After leaving the restaurant, I went straight home and devoured the food. It was great as always. Shortly after I finished eating, I got a call from Vicky. What does she want, I wonder? She said after dinner, she and her friends were going to go to one of her friends' homes to continue talking if that was all right. I said, sure, I'll see you when you get here. She told me she'd be home around 9 o'clock or so. I said, okay, we said our I love yous and ended the call. After that, I plopped on the couch to relax and turned on the TV. Being exhausted from work and with a belly full of carbs, I dozed off and didn't wake up until a couple hours later after having a bizarre nightmare. In this dream, Vicky and I were driving down a mountainous road with lots of twists and turns when she asked me to stop the car. When I did, she got out of the car and walked over to the edge of the road. When she got to the edge, she turned around, looked at me with a strange grin, and said, "Goodbye, Anthony." I tried getting out of the car and going to her, but it felt like I was locked in the driver's seat and couldn't move. The seat and shoulder belts felt like they weighed 500 pounds and I couldn't budge them. When I looked up again, she was gone. I screamed, "No!" and then woke up. When I did, I found myself slumped on the couch staring at the TV. I realized it was all just a bad dream, but it really freaked me out. I then noticed it was after 9:30 and Vicky still wasn't home. At that point, I thought her get together must have run over a bit. I decided to call her though, just to hear her voice and to tell her about the crazy dream I just had. I dialed and the call went straight to voicemail. I waited 15 minutes and called again and got the same. I also texted her a couple times and got no reply. I then started to worry. Vicky never turned off her phone and was never late for anything. She'd also text me multiple times when she was out, but that night I hadn't heard from her since she called me to say she'd be a little late. I decided next to call her best friend, who I'll call Lori. Lori is a nice woman, and I've become good friends with her and her husband. I called Lori and she answered. I told her I was trying to get in touch with Vicky but couldn't reach her. I said I was just calling to check how much longer they were going to be. Lori was silent for a moment and then asked, "What do you mean?" After I explained, Lori said she knew nothing about an after dinner get together and that everyone left the restaurant around 7:30. Hearing this, my heart sunk and I started to panic. I thought something terrible may have happened to Vicky, and the dream I had was some sort of omen. Lori said, "Let me try to call her." She put me on hold a few minutes and came back and said she was getting her voicemail too. Lori then said she was going to call around to the other ladies who were at the dinner to see if they knew anything and call me back. After I got off the phone with Lori, I called Vicky's mom and asked if she was there. She said no and inquired as to why. I thought she was. I told her, and like me, she panicked and called out to her husband and handed him the phone. I then explained the same to him. While he and I were talking, Vicky's mom tried calling her, but the calls were still going to voicemail. Not knowing what else to do, I told them I was going to get in my car and drive around to see if I could locate her car. The town is not that big, so I thought there was a good chance I'd locate her. Her dad said he and my mother-in-law would do the same, as we were all very worried at that point. I first drove down the main street and by the restaurant but didn't see anything. I then headed over to the shopping center, which has a couple bars and restaurants that stay open later, but again, nothing. While I was driving around, I got a call from Lori. She said she talked to everyone who was at the dinner, and they hadn't seen or talked to Vicky since leaving the restaurant. I wonder where she is. After frantically driving around for about 30 minutes, I spotted Vicky's car on a residential side street. I pulled in behind it and called Vicky's parents and then called Lori, and they all came right over to join me. Lori arrived first and I asked her if she knew anyone on this street. Before she had a chance to answer, Vicky's parents turned down the street and drove past us as I waved to them. They drove further up the street and pulled over in front of a house. They got out and headed right up to the front door. I started to walk towards the house when Lori grabbed me by the shirt and told me to wait a minute. As I turned to face her, I could hear my in-laws knocking on the door and yelling at someone to open up. Lori had a sad look on her face and told me she knew who lived there. She paused and told me the house belonged to Vicky's ex-boyfriend. I'll call him Ron. She said he and his wife and young daughter lived there. At first it didn't register with me, but then I quickly realized the implication. Vicky was cheating on me. With that, Lori and I walked towards the house, and while we were still about 20 yards away, the front porch light came on and I saw a man open the screen door. My father in law was yelling at him and trying to move past him into the house, with my mother in law right behind him screaming at the guy. They were both very loud, and one of the neighbors came running over from across the street to see what was going on. The next thing I saw was Vicky moving past the guy and onto the porch. Her parents shouted at her, asking how could she do such a thing. Vicky then looked over and saw me and Lori. She called out my name and started running towards me. I was on the verge of breaking down and didn't know what else to do, so I sprinted to my car and drove away. My adrenaline was so high I can't describe the feeling, and I was really in shock. I just started driving around town like a zombie with no destination in mind, and my phone started ringing. After driving about 10 minutes, I found myself at the exit ramp for the interstate out on the edge of town. I was going to make a U turn and head back home, but instead decided to get on the highway and drive a while longer to clear my head. Before I knew it, I had driven for an hour and was nearly 70 miles away. I got off the highway to use the bathroom and planned to turn around and go home. When I got back in my car, I turned out of the parking lot and made a last minute decision to keep driving west instead of going back home. I was still in a bad place and in no condition to talk to anyone. I ended up driving another 2 hours to the outskirts of a major city. By this time, it was nearly 3 a.m., and I was mentally and physically exhausted, so I pulled into a truck stop and fell asleep in my car. I was awoken by voices a few hours later as two truckers walked by my car into the store. At first, I forgot where I was and what happened last night, but then quickly remembered. I again had to use the restroom, so I went back into the store and got a large coffee before getting back in my car. I checked my messages, and as expected, I had multiple calls and texts from Vicky, her parents, and even Lori. Instead of calling one of them, I first called my boss and told him what I was dealing with and asked for a few days off. He told me to feel free to use all my PTO, my paid time off, if I needed to, and to keep him posted. I next called my parents to tell them. They were disgusted and concerned about my well being. My dad then said, "We tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen." He said, "You need to divorce the bee now." See, dad's not playing around, and this guy should have been listening to his dad from day one, but he didn't. After I finished talking to my parents, I texted Vicky's dad and told him I had left town for a while, but I was okay. He texted me back and said he was glad I was safe and to call him when I got the chance. I responded telling him I would, but it may take a few days as I just wasn't up to it. I then listened and read all the messages Vicky left me. The messages and her text confirmed she cheated. All the messages were of her apologizing and saying she made a terrible mistake, and it's something she'll never do again. As I listened and read all the messages, each one became progressively more desperate. This gave me some sort of twisted pleasure, I have to admit. At the moment, she went from the person I loved most in the world to someone I hated. I mean, really hated. I called my parents back and told them I was going to stay in the city where I was for a few days. They asked me to come to their place. I told them I needed to be alone to think things through, but would keep in touch. I assured them I was fine and not to worry. I said I was in no danger of doing something stupid. I then spent the next 2 days exploring the city and thinking about my next steps. By the end of the second day, I had made three key life decisions. First, I decided I wanted to divorce Vicky. Second, I didn't want to see or speak to her ever again if I could avoid it. And third, I didn't want to ever set foot in that town again. I first had to address my job situation before doing anything else. I called my boss and told him of my plans and asked if there was an opportunity for me to transfer. I explained that if not, I would be submitting my notice as I didn't want to go anywhere near the town where my wife lived. He understood my dilemma and came up with an idea. He explained that the store manager for one of our urban stores had just been terminated. He said he'd love to have me take over the store and turn it around. Without hesitation, I told him I'd take the job. He told me before accepting the position, I should first go there to check it out. I agreed and drove the 3 hours to the location and checked into a nearby hotel. That evening, I went to a mall and bought myself several $100s worth of clothes and proper shoes as I left town that fateful night with just the clothes on my back. I then went back and washed all the clothes at the hotel laundry. The next morning, I went out to explore the community where the store was located. It was a rough neighborhood. I mean, really rough. I checked the crime stats for the area, and they were off the charts bad. After driving around a while, I parked in the store parking lot and just watched customers going in and out. I then went into the store to check things out. I noticed the employees were all very nice but in desperate need of training. I went back to my car and thought about it. I decided to take the job and called my boss to tell him. That afternoon, we completed the paperwork, and 3 days later, I started working at the store. That night, I called my parents and told them my plans, and they were immediately against it. My dad suggested I put in my notice and come back home and get a job there. He said there were hundreds of openings throughout the metro area offering better pay that were in safe neighborhoods. I told my dad I understood his concern, but said I wanted to stay with the company and working for my boss as I've been treated very well since the day I started. The following day, I called several attorneys back in the county where Vicky lived. I selected one and paid the $1,500 retainer fee on my credit card. I also gave him my wife's contact information. I told him I didn't want to speak to her again and asked that he call to inform her of my intentions. Vicky had been trying to reach me nonstop since I left, but I never responded. That's smart because, like I've said over and over, going no contact is the best way to handle these situations. My attorney called her right after he got off the phone with me, then called me back after he spoke with her. He said she was hysterical and said she didn't want a divorce and just wanted to speak with me. He said he finished the call by suggesting she secure legal counsel and advised her that all communications were to go through him. He said she screamed no and hung up on him. After I spoke with the attorney, I called Vicky's dad and explained to him my decision. I told him I had relocated to another state over 400 miles away and was in the process of filing for divorce. He paused for a moment and was silent, but then spoke up in a broken voice and said he was disappointed and sad. He explained he wasn't disappointed with me, but he was disappointed and ashamed of his daughter. Her dad actually told me that he and his wife selfishly would like me to stay married to Vicky, but said I was doing the right thing by divorcing her. Now, that's unusual for a girl's dad to side with the guy, but in this case, this guy did, so I give him a thumbs up for that. He told me to do what I needed to do and to not worry. He said they would make sure Vicky is cared for. He then asked if I wanted him to arrange to have my clothing and furniture shipped somewhere. I told him no, stating I didn't want anything from the apartment. I then told him I would pay the final 2 months' rent on the lease, and he told me to forget about it and that Vicky would pay. He said it was the least she could do for me after what she'd done. I thanked him, and for the first time, I broke down. I thanked him for being so good to me as a foolish young man who stole his daughter away. He told me I was the best thing that ever happened to her. He said she realizes that now, but it's too late. He wished me well and told me to keep in touch. That was the last time I spoke with anyone from Vicky's family until I had to go back 7 months later for the hearing. I was hoping to not have to appear in person, but my attorney said I had to since Vicky didn't voluntarily agree to our terms. It's not that she was looking to get anything from me financially. She was just holding out, trying to get me back. Right up to the morning of the hearing, Vicky left me voicemail messages and sent me texts begging for a second chance. She even sent me three handwritten letters. I never responded to any of them. While I initially had deep hatred towards her, at the hearing I just felt pity for her. I wanted to avoid seeing Vicky and her family before the hearing, so my attorney and I walked in with just 5 minutes to spare. Vicky looked at me with tears in her eyes and waved. I just nodded my head. During the hearing, her attorney told the judge that it was his client's wish that they attend counseling, as the only thing she wanted to do was to reconcile and continue on with the marriage. My attorney had warned me this was a possible risk. However, to our surprise, the judge said that it was obvious that I wasn't interested in reconciliation as I had moved out of state. To confirm, he asked my attorney, and my attorney said, "That is correct, Your Honor." He told the judge I had moved out of state and started a new job. He said my only ask of the court was to finalize the divorce equitably. Since the state has at-fault divorce laws and Vicky acknowledged her infidelity, the hearing was quick and the divorce was made final. After the hearing, I spoke to Vicky in the presence of my attorney. She was crying and told me she was sorry and came in for a hug. Though I didn't want to, I hugged her and told her I wish her and her parents nothing but the best. I then embraced her parents and left. That was it. The marriage and life that once had so much promise ended nearly as quickly as it began. It's now 6 years later, and while I'm still single, I've been in a committed relationship with a great girl for the past 2 years. Neither of us are high on marriage, but we do plan to stay together forever and want to have kids in the near future. When that happens, we'll move in together, so they're still not even living with each other. As for Vicky, last I heard, she now lives with a divorced guy who has several adult children. From what I was told, he's in his early 50s and used to be a neighbor of hers when she grew up. Apparently, her parents aren't happy about it, as Vicky was friends with this guy's oldest daughter when they were growing up. Because of this, her relationship with her parents has become further strained. How do I know all this? Lori told me. I've remained friends with Lori and her husband, and we're connected on F-Book. About a year ago, she and her husband were in my area, and my girlfriend and I met them for dinner. Lori also told me that Vicky's old boyfriend, the one she cheated on me with, is still with his wife, but they both cheat on each other. Once a cheater, always a cheater, as they say. She said they split up for a year, during which time his wife had a baby with another guy. And he and Vicky dated on and off for a while. Oh my goodness. The guy and his wife have since reconciled and had another child. The OP says, "What a bunch of sick, dysfunctional people. I'm so glad I got out of that situation when I did, or I'd still be a part of that mess." He says, "Be careful out there, gentlemen." And that's the end of his story. And I thought it was a great story. Now, he made a lot of mistakes right up front. He rushed right into marriage. He married young. He followed his woman to her hometown, which is a big mistake. But I have to hand it to the guy. Once he found out she was cheating on him, he got out of town and left her like Speed Racer, man. He got out of there so fast, she didn't even get a chance to explain herself. And then he immediately filed for divorce. So I think he handled that like a boss. And now I want to cover what I think are the morals of this story. The first one, alpha widows are not relationship material and definitely not marriage material. An alpha widow, like I said up front, is somebody who has been imprinted on by a strong male, and typically those males have broken up with them for some reason. And those women never get over those guys. So when you're dealing with women like that, you got to tread very lightly, guys. Next, rushing into marriage at any age, especially when you are young, is a very risky proposition. That goes without saying. Next, a man should never follow a woman. A woman should always follow a man. Now, if I got women out there today listening to me, I know that's going to be controversial, But I'm telling you guys, it never seems to work out well when a guy follows his woman. Next, when cheating happens, just end it. I've said this over and over, and I'll keep saying it in every video. Do not try to rebuild the relationship or try again. It just never works. Next, no contact is always the best approach, and you saw that very clearly in this story. Next, living a great life is the best possible revenge because I guarantee this Vicky is still following what this guy is doing, and she's probably seeing, wow, this guy is doing well in his career. Oh man, he's got a new hot girlfriend, and that could have been me. We could have been building our family now. We could have been getting on with our lives and living a great life. And here I am now living with this 50-year-old divorcee who's got 3 adult children. I mean, she can't be happy. And then finally, marriage is not necessary in order to have a successful relationship or a family. Many men think you have to get married in order to have a successful relationship and build a family. You don't. However, you still need to be cautious with that and plan everything out and make sure everything is specified before you jump into any kind of relationship like that. But you can have a successful relationship and build a family without getting married. So those are my thoughts, and now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? How do you think this guy handled it? Would you have done something different? Tell us about it in the comments. Also, be sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel, and I will talk to you on the next one.